So that should work now. So now it should be audio and video, I hope. Hi, sorry about that. I know it's kind of a pain in the ass. It's been a pain in the ass for me. So let's get started. How are you doing? Who was here last time? Oh, down. That's good. That's glad to hear it. And who's new? Raise your hands if you're new. Are you lost? Yeah, maybe. Right. So the first thing you need to know is that this class will not feel like other history classes. There's a lot of hands-on work. A lot of it is technical. It's not a programming class. It's not a computer science class, but we learn skills that you will apply in the second half of the semester. And so that means that for history students, this first half of the class is the part that feels impossible. And you will be, rolling boulders uphill a lot of the time. Not all of you and not all the time, but there will be moments where you wonder if you've been condemned to some long sentence. So that's just a reality that you have to like, if that reality is no good for you, then you might want, come on, where's my, oh shoot. Oh, there we are. I need to allow that. There we go. Phew. Much better. So if you just need to come to terms with that. That's the sort of refresher from last time. Did anybody look at those videos from last year if you weren't here last time? Yeah, so maybe that helped a little bit. Today is going to be mostly technical, so in the hopes that by the end of class you can basically finish your assignment. What's your name again? Jonathan. Were you over here last time, right? Yeah. Yeah. So Jonathan's been working on it since the middle of class last time, I think. So Jonathan has made some progress. Anybody else made progress on the assignment? Other people maybe gave it a try, but not so much. Okay. So the assignment is intended to familiarize you with the tools that we're going to be using in the class, and in particular and especially with this thing called Git. So we're going to talk a little bit about Git. We're going to practice it on the interweb. And then we're going to take a little break and we're going to come back and learn more about Git. And then, so in the first half, you don't need to know much to do the stuff we're doing. And then in the second half of class, you will look behind the curtain a little bit. I won't look that far behind the curtain. We won't look behind the second curtain or the third curtain, but we'll look behind the first curtain for a little bit, okay? And we'll try to get you up and running. I don't know if this will work with VS Code, Visual Studio Code, which is the main tool that you will interact with during the class. That's a code editor. All right, here we go. This is Git. This is the Git logo. How many of you use track changes in a word processor, or suggestion mode on Google Docs? Any of you? Yeah. So not as many of you as I might have thought. Really, that's interesting. When I return student papers, I always have track changes on and my things, but maybe not everybody does it. If you've used track changes, you know that it can be a powerful tool for helping you keep track of where you were and where you're going. And I know that like when I'm writing, sometimes I'm not sure if I'm going in the right direction. I turn track changes on so that I know what I've done between old version and decision to go in direction A. And I can always backtrack and go in direction B instead. And you'll notice that the Git logo is a branching path, right? We come from the top, we get to a point, and we go in two different directions at once. Git is used, I would say now, by basically every important programming project in the world. So if you're going to do any programming, or if you're going to interface with people who program, you need to know something about Git. It is the type of software that Git is called version control software, and from the name you can see that it is intended to allow multiple versions of a piece of software to exist, it was version control is old, goes back at least to the 1970s, and Git was developed around 2000, maybe a little earlier, by Linus Torvalds, the developer of the Linux kernel, to enable massive collaboration of thousands of developers around the world on a single project. So you have thousands of people programming at the same time. You can't easily hand off one file to one person and another file to another person or something like that. Instead, you have all these people working on these files at once, and then they smush their changes back together, and Git is the tool that allows that smushing to take place in a sort of controlled, thoughtful way. So that's Git. That's the underlying, what we sometimes call the plumbing, sometimes we call it the porcelain of programming projects. It's a piece of infrastructure. Most of the time you don't see it, but it's always there and it's always necessary for the programming project to work. GitHub is a service that unlocks much of the potential of Git. So Git is this piece of plumbing. It lives on your computer. It lives on servers in the web. It lives on basically every developer's notebook and every server on the planet. GitHub is a code sharing website, which essentially hosts copies of code that you or I or Linus Torvalds or Microsoft or Google or Amazon is developing. There were code sharing websites before GitHub, but GitHub is radically larger. And basically every open source project in the world has some kind of a presence on GitHub, and many closed source projects also use GitHub to organize their code. About 3 years ago, GitHub was purchased by Microsoft, and it's been quite interesting to watch it develop under the kind of leadership of that old school aristocrat, kind of landowner of the tech industry. So it's where we are going to work in this class, and if you ever work on a more formal or serious project, that's also likely where you're going to work. Not for sure, but likely. The activity for today is a tiny little application called History Please. And it's we can kind of look at the source, and I'll do that in a second. It's a friend of mine wrote a tool. I rewrote it to work with history, and then we added content to the tool in this class, and we've been doing that now for about 5 years. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to add to this little tool. It's just a toy. There are lots of problems with this tool, and I leave it that way. I never fix anything, but I leave it looking kind of like my house, because that's part of our process here, is fixing stuff in this activity. So today we're going to try to make some progress. So if you could take out your laptop, I'll have them out. And that URL that's in Slack, if you can navigate to that URL, we're going to explore. This is going to be a little bit hard for me to do with a split screen. Maybe I should just split the screen. We're going to explore the structure of a GitHub web page. So let's open this up. Oh boy, it's pale, huh? Should we turn it? Is that a little easier to see? Yep. Okay. So we're looking at this page here. What we see is a structure that is common to every GitHub, what's called repository, which is to say project. We have the username, that's digital history, that's our organization, and the repository name, history please. We have a bunch of tabs at the top. You won't see settings because you're not an administrator, but you'll see most of these. And we are interested in code, issues, and pull requests. And then you'll see this secondary menu with a bunch of information on it and some drop-down menus. We don't have to worry about those right now just yet. And then what looks a lot like a file listing in a directory or like a folder on your computer, right? So you see a bunch of subfolders and then a bunch of text files. Yeah? Underneath it, so we see here there's a file called readme.md. That file is written in a format called Markdown. So it's a text format that is easily rendered into HTML. And we can see here, this is the content of the README. Some of this is a little bit obscure. It has some build instructions and for anybody who might want to teach with this. And some of this is just a review of the same content that I'm showing you right now. So from this website, we can begin by exploring the repository. We'll see some things that we'll see again later on. There's a file called package.json, J-S-O-N. And if we look at it, we can have it rendered right here. You can see it has this funky format. Curly brace at the beginning, curly brace at the end. And a bunch of names in quotations, followed by colon, followed by a value, and that value is usually another word or two, also in quotation marks. Each line ends in a comma, except when we look here, we see more squirrely brackets here, a bunch of squirrely brackets here, similarly in these last couple. So just by looking at the structure, we can start to intuit perhaps what this is. It's a data structure in which some of the data fields are simple and some are more complex. So JSON is a standard for making nested data fields or data structures. It's called the JavaScript Object Notation, and we will be working with it in our class. You don't have to know that much about it. One of the sort of philosophical premises of this class is you don't have to know that much to do stuff. So you can poke around in ignorance, and maybe things will work out for you. Maybe not always, but maybe they will. And then we see there are these two index files. You may have sometimes noticed files called index.html. Has anybody ever seen that before? What's your name and where have you seen it?
Sometimes they just pop up on my desktop.
What's your name though?
Astrid, sorry.
Astrid, no, it's okay. Like sometimes it just pops up on your desktop and then you click on it and it's a web page,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so index is the default file that is read by a web server when it's looking, when it comes to a directory that it only has the instruction, take me to the directory. When it gets there, it's like, is there an HTML file for me? Maybe index.html? It'll try and find it. If it does, then it'll show it to you. So we often see files when we're browsing through repositories like this named index, and we'll see that in our repositories later on. And then there's a bunch of directories of folders here with some kind of standard names and some non-standard names. So there's one called lib, and that has a JavaScript, a .js file in it. There's this one called bin, and it has another JavaScript file in it. And then there are these three, CSS, and it has some CSS files in it, some styling files. That's not surprising. And then we have two others, images. Maybe unsurprisingly, we have a bunch of images. And then if we look in history, this is where the action is for us in this class. There are three further directories, events, people, and trends. And if we look, we can see that each folder contains a whole bunch of individual files. And in that, and each of the files ends in a .md. So what does .md mean? Do you remember? Markdown. So these are files that, like the README file, are written in a syntax called Markdown. And we don't know yet exactly what's in them. But maybe we can look at one here. I remember when this one went in. So maybe you guys remember this, 2019 NBA Finals, .md. Here, this is what the file, they play boldly. So here's what the file looks like. This is what a student wrote. And then let's go look at the rendered version. And this is what you see when the file is displayed. And you can see a couple of things. There's a heading here, and there's some bold text here. Here, it's a more complicated one. So the heading is Discovery of Insulin. We see an image. We see some quotes here, a list, some links. So it's a much more complex page. And if we look at the text, we'll see that this markup is being translated into the sort of user-friendly version in order to be displayed to us. So as we go through the list, as we browse, we can see that every individual file contains some story, sometimes a very brief, and maybe what in Wikipedia would be called a stub, maybe a slightly inadequate account of an event, and sometimes a more lengthy one. So Discovery of Insulin is a good one. I don't remember if it's any good. This is Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which describes the treaty by which we are bound here in the Great Lakes region. So if we go back here, we can see there are 3 categories: events, people, and trends. Events are, just like, again, not knowing much about the project, you can just imagine things that go in events are like past, I don't want to use the word events, occurrences that are limited in space and time, and that have some historical significance. People focus on an individual, and trends maybe is describes less specific. The raptors. There's some issues here, really. This is really the only good one. Multiculturalism, which describes a kind of ideological feature of Canadian history. All of these are written by students. None of them is a final word. So our project today is to try to improve this website. Or not, it's not a website. To improve this tool. I'll show you how the tool works after you guys do a little bit of work, okay? So this is how we start. We navigate to the GitHub site. Are we all there? We take a look. Well, we browse here through the events, or through the files, and we ask 2 things. What is missing? So, like, what are events in Canadian history that ought to be represented here that aren't? Or people, or trends? What's missing? And what could be fixed? Almost every little file here is a little bit amateurish. So what changes would you like to make, would you like to see in these files? Now, we look at these, and then we'll go over. So we've just been working in the code tab. Remember, I told you we wanted to talk about issues and pull requests. These are suggestions for improvements that have already been made by other students. And this is a little bit orphaned. Every year, it's kind of abandoned for a year and then we come back to it. So you can see that most of these were made in September 2020. One thing that one could do, for instance, is take a look at this issue and see if it's still valid in the current state of the repository. So if we go over here and look at history, people, let's just look and see if there are multiple Justin Trudeaus anymore. Doesn't look like it. Oh, yeah. So look, you see, what happened was 2 people were working on the website at the same time, and one person committed a file here, added a file. I'll try not to use that technical language. Added a file Justin-Trudeau, and someone else added a file Justin Trudeau. And that issue is still valid. What we have to do now is look at the 2 files, take what's good from each of them, and make a decision about which one to keep, and delete the other one. So so maybe I'll walk through the process of doing that. Okay. Something you might want to do is make sure you're logged into your GitHub account. Who doesn't have a GitHub account yet? Good time to get to do it. So make sure you're logged into your GitHub account before we proceed. And then I'm going to just show you how I would do it. I'm going to open each of these files in a new tab. You can see I hardly have enough tabs open. So you see we have a quote and then something that maybe looks like it's not really working right. What do you think this is supposed to be here? It's supposed to be an image, and you can kind of tell, first of all, it has the word image here, and then there's a like a long URL that ends in JPG, a JPEG format. But the whole thing's not very long. Let's look at the other one. Okay. You can see this is a little more, this is maybe the one that I would start with, you know, because the other one's not as not as fulsome. So I'm logged into the site, and as a result, there's a little pencil there that's going to allow me to edit this file. So I'm going to press edit here. And you can see, look, there are two tabs. Because it's a markdown file, I have the option to check what it's going to look like when I'm done. So first thing I'm going to do, I know what the problem is here. There's a space between the two halves of the link definition. You guys don't know anything about Markdown yet, but that's okay. And we see that's happening all over. So the first thing I'm going to do is fix these links. And now I'm going to preview it. Okay, so I fixed the links, but I've still got the problem that everything's run together in one paragraph. I'm going to fix that by adding spaces like that. So in Markdown, so here's some things we're learning. In Markdown, paragraphs are separated by empty lines. And if what I really want is a heading, and I think I do, I start with hash marks. One hash mark means a first level heading, so a huge heading. 2 hash marks means a second level heading all the way down to 6. And I'm going to do the same thing here. And here. I don't actually need the line underneath because this is marked as a heading, and so it'll know that this is going to be a paragraph. Oops. Oops. Okay. So that's a modest improvement. There's still a little bit of repetition here, which is a little odd, but it's definitely an improvement. And since I'm running out of time, I'm just gonna get this improvement into the application. It's not perfect, but it's better, so I might as well do it. Maybe I'll just do, yeah, I'll make that. Okay, so I have all these changes. I scroll down and I see I have this box here where it says commit changes. And what commit means is I'm going to save my changes in a special place where they can be reviewed later. Okay? So I'm going to say modest just modest changes to JustinTrudeau.md. And I'm going to actually add an extended definition where here it is, where I make a reference to this issue here. Fix up this version of Justin Trudeau in preparation fixing number 175. And because I own this repository, I have the option to commit directly to the main branch. But instead I'm going to do what you would do, which is create a new branch for this commit and start a pull request. It gives me a default name. I'm just going to, but I don't like that default name. I'm going to call it fix up, no spaces, JD page. So now I've got a kind of decent commit message that means something. It also tells people that that I'm dealing with that issue. I'm going to propose the change. Okay. So it's looking okay. I'm going to create the pull request. And now we can look over at this pull request tab. And we can see that there is, so again, code issues pull requests, that there's now a message about this change that an administrator can come in and approve. And notice that that hash sign with the number has been turned into a link that describes the issue that I'm trying to address. Okay, so now in my role as an administrator, let's go back to that. No, sorry, whoops, I'm in the wrong place. Pull requests are actually kind of complicated. I don't want to talk too much about it. If I was really like a different person, I might say, hey, this is great. Can you also please delete the other Trudeau page? Sorry, I can't type. I'm going to comment. In my original kind of identity as the editor, not the admin, I'm like, oh, okay, good idea. Maybe I should add that to this pull request. I'm going to go to my new branch, my new place, my special version of the repository, and I think this will work. I'm going to look at the old Justin Trudeau page. I'm going to delete this file. Oh wait, was this the wrong one? No, this is the one I just fixed. No, I'm not going to do that. shit. I don't want to do that. I'm going to go to the other one. Okay, I'm going to delete this file. Deduplicate Trudeau. Really, we see enough of them already. Fixes 175. And I'm going to commit to the same branch. Now, if we go back to the pull request, we can see that there are now 2 commits in the PR, in the pull request. We made some modest changes to Justin Trudeau, and we've deduplicated the Trudeau pages. So we'll go back to the conversation, and now as an administrator, I'm going to merge the pull request. I'm going to confirm the merge. And now we look back at the code. And now you can see by looking at the URL, we're in the main version of the website. But if I go and travel to look, we'll see there's only one Justin Trudeau. So that's how the change, so this is how the change is made. I come to the website, I make a bunch of changes in the online editor. I go through the kind of slightly complicated process of committing those changes to a new branch. I create a pull request, it is reviewed, and eventually merged, and now the changes are incorporated into the main website. Okay, so here's your job now. I always do this as group work. Why don't you kind of make little pods that are not too close to each other of people who are working on, so why don't you 4 work together, you 4 in the front, but you don't have to get too close. Are you okay getting a little closer to someone? Why don't you work with the 2, sorry, that's Astrid, and somebody else move over kind of to, sorry, what's your name? Elizabeth. To Elizabeth, towards Elizabeth. And then maybe the 4 of you guys can kind of colonize the back of the classroom a little bit. You 3 in the back. That's, sorry, who are you in the second to last row? All in the back. Yeah, what's your name? Jacqueline. Can you work with these 2 guys near you? And then you 2 work with, I used to know your name. You told me your name last time, but I can't remember it. What is it? Miriam, okay. And then you 6 figure it out. Okay? And this is what you're going to do. You're going to look through it and think, what needs to be fixed? Some of you are going to create issues on the website. So here, hey, pay attention still. Look. So you're going to identify problems. Listen, wait, everybody, listen up. You're going to identify problems. You're going to create new issues that describe the problem, and then you're going to solve the problem with a PR, and with a pull request. So you can divide those tasks informally as you go.
So if one person makes an issue and then
yeah, you guys will be talking about it. One person will be typing up the issue. The other person will be scanning through the text and saying, "Hey, I found another problem."
Do you want us to just use one markdown file?
Well, you'll probably identify different kinds of issues. So there'll be problems with some of the existing text, and there will also be things that are totally missing that should be done. And so you'll assign someone to write that markdown file and add it to the appropriate place, and then other people will be writing issues. Yeah. What's your name? Alicia. people who are watching, I'm going to pause you. How can I be only one? This doesn't look right. Why is that not updating? There we are. So you can see they're not all done. Like there's still a lot of work for me, or if there, in other years I've like deputized other people to admin and stuff. It's just a little bit hectic today. We could still do that. But we can see that we merged a whole bunch of stuff, actually. So at least 10 or 12 PRs, so nice work. Now, what is this? This is a little tiny application. Here. And if we look at the code, you can see there's a bunch of stuff you don't understand. There's a bunch of declaration of constants, and there's a bunch of functions, function definitions, and then a function call. Get random hero, that's got to be renamed actually. And then here we have something a little bit similar, a bunch of function definitions, and something, and these calls to something called app. All right. What is this? So here I am at the command line. This is where I like to live. I know not everybody's going to feel that way. You can see I'm in the History Please directory. So there's a copy of History Please on GitHub, and that's what you guys have been working in this whole time. I also have a copy on my desktop, or on my laptop. I'm going to retrieve the changes that you guys just made. You can see there are a bunch of things that changed. About 10 or 12 files. For instance, we can see that Drake.md was deleted. I don't forget who deduplicated Drake. Somebody? Thanks. And we can see it's all minus signs next to Drake.md. So that's because it was just destroyed. And in most of the others, there's a combination of pluses and minuses. So some things have been added and some things have been taken away. I'm sitting here in the repository, and now I'll show you what it is that we've been building. Oops, came up over here. So a little application called HIS393. And when I click on this History Please button, it gives me a random entry from the so it's like, whoa, it's big. It's looking a little grim there. So it's hardly sophisticated, but it's the tiny, tiny beginnings of a little application about Canadian history. And so we start to see with this totally trivial example a couple of principles at work. Let me just see if yes, I'm already recording. Good. Whoops. Where's HIS393? There it is. We see, first of all, that all of this text is actually code, right? So we write we write in a way that a computer can understand and render in a user-friendly manner. But that each of those files is a piece of data that the program assimilates and spits back out. Also, none of us know all of the things that have been written about in this repository. So we see the possibilities that collaboration can unleash, right? So your particular interest combined with the interests of people who were here 5 years ago, and with my interests and people here were here 3 years ago, and so forth, to create a kind of a broader, potentially broader vision, one that is always subject to revision, right? So because it exists as code in a public repository, it's always possible to revise. And someday we may decide, Drake is actually, it didn't turn out so good with Drake. Maybe we don't want to talk about him in our little history application. So instead of publishing a book, we have this repository of code that can be continually updated, and also here, it can change form. So for instance, this repository actually takes two forms. Here, let me make this a little bit bigger. And in the first version that I wrote, we just got some text. So the markdown was rendered in only the most kind of minimal way as slightly modified text that could be presented in a terminal. And each time we get a different one. There's Justin Bieber, talented ? And I think that if I do the command line switch there, oops, maybe that's not the case. What's there's somewhere a command line switch. Trends and events. So I think this will work. And we'll see, because there are only 4, these are going to repeat pretty fast. So we can filter it by category. We could perhaps have a more complicated way of dealing with our little database here. Right now we just have these 3 simplified categories, but maybe we could somehow embed data into those files in a more structured way that allowed us to do more complicated things. So again, this is a toy that shows us some of the ways in which we might use computational techniques to change the way we encounter history as consumers, or the way that we present it as producers. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit more about Git. How many of you have Visual Studio Code already installed on your computers? Almost everyone. So raise your hand actually if you don't, because it's a smaller number. Right. You're going to want to have it pretty soon. So let me show you a little bit what this process would have looked like if you were working not on the website, but in VS Code. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky for me because I'm going to have to be working on that other screen. Let's bring this over here. So this is the interface for VS Code. Let me see if I make it smaller. Maybe we can see everything. No. There we go. So you can see there's a menu at the top. There's this sidebar over here with lots of different options, and when I press on one of them, it opens up a secondary menu over here. And then we have tabs up at the top which represent files that you might be editing, that you might be working on. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to go through the some of the configuration that you have to do here to get Git and GitHub working with VS Code. I think I already have that on the website, and if I don't, I can put it up. But I'm just going to show you what this would look like for me. So, what the first thing I do is go over here to history, please. And I'm going to copy the address of the repository. Now, yours will probably be over here, an HTTPS address. I always use SSH. We don't use this with VS Code. And if you look at it, you'll notice that unlike most of the URLs that you normally see, it ends in a .git extension. So I head over to VS Code. It says here, I've just opened it, and there's nothing open at the moment. Instead of opening a folder, I'm going to clone a repository. So I'm going to take this copy of the code that's in the web, and I'm going to make a copy which is called cloning locally. I'm going to clone from GitHub. Oh, this actually almost never works when I do this. Okay, let's see if this really works. Yeah, usually it doesn't work for me. Okay, I'm going to clone a repository over here. I'm just going to do the copy the URL. I think for you guys who aren't on Linux and not using Firefox, it in general always works to just do it the simple way. But I'm going to just clone directly from the URL. And I'm going to put it temp, and I'm going to clone it here. And I would like to open the cloned repository. Don't save because it doesn't matter. Yes, I trust the authors. Okay, and now we see over here a bunch of the same structures that we saw before when we were looking on the website. I actually have a change I want to make, which is that there really should be a repository field in the package description. Oops. Repository. And okay. I'm going to save that. And now we see there have been some changes. And that's why it's highlighted over here. If I go over to the Git panel, we can see that oddly there's nothing there's nothing described here, and that's because we have not yet committed anything. So we're going to start by wait, did I say this? Yeah, let's just say it. Okay, what the hell is going on here? Yes, there are. Oh, maybe I have to. just show automatically. Okay, so I'm going to start by staging this change. So that's getting me ready to commit. And now I'm going to commit the change. I'm going to need a message. Add repository fields to package.json. That's really all we need to know. And then, now that it's been committed, we'll look over here. I don't know if I make this bigger, will you be able to see? Yeah. In the bottom left, there is this little icon here with a circle and an up and a down arrow. And what that says is there's one change that needs to be pushed back up to the main repository. And there are no changes that need to be pulled back in order to update my repository. So I'm going to press this button. And if we come and look on the website, oops, sorry, in the wrong place. We can see that the latest commit is my commit to add repository fields to package.json. And if I look at it, the repository field is in fact there. So what's happened in this little moment is I brought a copy of the repository to my laptop. I worked on it directly in my editor, and then I pushed those changes back up to the web. That is the workflow that you will normally use in this class and in most of your life as a person who worked with software. There are some circumstances under which you will be working in the web editor like you saw just before. But those are relatively rare and usually for relatively simple things. Was that a can? No. So for instance, if I were doing the assignment, this is what I would do. I'm going to cheat a little bit because I'll go to the assignment and where's the link? I'm going to click on the invitation. I'm going to accept the assignment. I'm going to refresh the page. Let me see if this works. Oh, this is the online Visual Studio Code. I actually haven't tried it yet. I just enabled it for fun on the thing. You guys can try that. I won't do that right in the demo because I don't know what's going to happen. I'll go over here to my repository. I'm going to copy the URL. I'm going to go back to VS Code. I'm gonna, how do I get back to? What is, here? Oh, never mind. Where is it? Well, maybe I'll just open. I'm going to clone a new repository. I'll paste in the link. I'll save it in the same place. And I will open here. And now we see here are the assignment files. So the process that you will follow is you will follow the link. You will wait for your assignment to be created. You'll go over there. You'll grab the URL for your copy of the assignment. I'll come back to VS Code. You'll open the command palette, which you'll open the command palette, which is Control-Shift-P on Windows and Command-Shift-P on Mac, and you'll type git clone, and then you'll paste in your URL, and it will bring that copy to you. You make your changes, and then you push them back to the website. And once they're on the website, I can see them and mark them. Now, there are other things too, as Jonathan? Yes, yes. As Jonathan, sorry. As Jonathan has already seen, it is possible to run tests. I don't know if you actually successfully ran the tests. It's possible to run tests and check to see if your work meets the criteria for passing. And then you can keep working until you're done and then push your changes. Or you can push your changes all along. The actual work is relatively simple. The hard part is getting your environment all set up. So that's what you need to work on right now. You really only have about 10 lines of text to write in the actual assignment, unless you do the reflection, unless you're trying to get an A, in which case you have more to do. It's almost 4. Why don't I whip through some stuff that I'll review again on Thursday, okay? And I think we're already behind in this class. Sorry. Where's my... Okay. No? Oh, sorry, I was in the wrong... I keep forgetting that I'm not looking at the right place down there. Here we are. Okay. There's so many tabs. This is our activity. We don't need this. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the words that I used in talking about Git, and I guess we'll have to talk about them on Thursday, unfortunately. So Git is designed around collaboration, and in effect, an assignment is a collaboration between me and you, right? So I did some work, and now you're going to do some work, and then I'm going to review it. So we need to know some basic terms. Oh, geez, this is really hard to see, and that SVG doesn't really. The kind of canonical version of the repository lives on GitHub. All of us, if all of us are working on the same project, we all have copies. And we can talk to each other, or we can talk to each other through GitHub. GitHub is called a remote when you're working on your laptop. So you have a local copy, which is connected to one or more remotes. We can see, here's my local copy, and here's a connection between my local copy and my remote on GitHub. And we could have a much more complex relationship where Alice, Bob, Kalsang, and I all share a single remote, and we all work together on that project. And there might be even more complicated relationships. Within each repository, whether it's a local copy or a remote, there are usually multiple branches. And if we look at this, these diagrams take a little bit of getting used to maybe, but they generally go left to right. So this is the beginning of time, and this is the present. And it shows the slightly complex development of the repository as a whole. We begin with some initial condition. we maybe develop a small feature over here on its own branch while simultaneously working on other stuff on the main branch. So we have one branch over here, a little feature. Meanwhile, the rest of us are plugging away. So maybe, I can't remember his name, Alexia. Maybe Alexia is working on a little feature, but the rest of us are all collaborating on main. You know, that's just how we've organized our labor. And then we get to this point where we're like, oh, actually, we've got a big issue that we have to deal with. And I can't remember anybody's name at all. I'm just blanking completely. Was it Elizabeth? And Elizabeth is going to work on the big feature. So the rest of us are plugging away while Elizabeth works on this big feature. And if we look at this diagram, we can see, well, Alexia did some stuff. But meanwhile, the rest of us moved on. And then Elizabeth started doing something too. So we have 3 endpoints right now, but we only want one piece of software. So we're going to have to find some way to bring them all together. Each of these is a branch. Oh dear. And we can say that because Git is made for collaboration, the history of Git is not like track changes. It's not a straight line. It's a tree, a branching, forking tree, in which nothing is ever lost, but also in which it can be kind of hard to figure stuff out. This is a little bit hard to read. This is what we just kind of showed happening, or more or less what just showed happening. Here we had a main copy of the repository, and each of you made changes to your own repository. That involved cloning the repo, making your own branch, submitting a pull request back to the main branch on the main remote, and then I downloaded those changes onto my laptop. So that process, which for me is now almost transparent, which I do automatically now, actually has a lot of complicated infrastructure behind it. And probably not that far from now, in the future, you'll be able to do this even more transparently than we do it right now. Oh geez, let's see how I make this. I don't know why it's such a mess. When we look at that history in more detail, here's the main branch, but each node on this branch is a point at which some change was made to the code. And although it doesn't have a branch name, it does have an identity. So each commit can be identified, and for instance, we can pull back and look at that earlier commit. We can roll our changes back to some place that we knew was safe, and so forth. As you noticed when I was working, first I had to save my changes just the way you normally save a file, but that doesn't really tell Git anything. In order for Git to really understand what I'm doing, I have to save my changes and then commit them. And once they're committed, then they're saved in what is effectively the Git database. And we can see if we look at a very simple history, it might look like this. We start a certain starting point. We add some person. We're happy with that, and we go ahead and we add some event. Maybe I will skip this because it's complicated, and we'll talk about it later. I just want to introduce these words, and we'll review it on Thursday. Geez, how do I fix this? We can see, so I showed you there was that branching tree structure. We have a beginning and then some divergence. And then we need to bring the branches back together. And bringing the branches back together is called a merge. And when we do a PR, a pull request, we start a separate branch and then we bring it back together in a merge so that the main line can continue. That works great unless sometimes there are conflicts. So for instance, today there were two people who independently worked on Seth Rogen. Who worked on Seth Rogen, putting the image? So the two of you. And I got to one of those PRs first, and I committed it, and then I think it was yours, and then when I got to yours, it was not possible to merge it automatically because it had been changed, and your changes would have messed up those changes. So, and that's called a merge conflict when work progresses on two branches at once. And they totally suck if they happen, and we try to avoid them happening here in this class. As you get more proficient, you start to be able to manage merge conflicts more easily. It's now not such a big deal for me to manage them. And then you heard me use these words push and pull. Oh dear. So you saw me make my own repository, create a local copy. And we ended up with two different main branches. One on the remote, which is usually called origin, and one on the local branch. And you can see sometimes that might proceed for quite a while. So we have 1, 2, sort of 3, 4, 5, really. But after git push, they're going to be flattened, and the main branch on the remote will contain that whole history in a single line, and that's called pushing. When we push changes to the remote, the two histories converge. And when you make changes, and I want to incorporate them into my work, we call that pulling. So you make changes to the repository, you push them to the remote, I pull them in from the remote, and then I push my own changes back. So that pulling and pushing, I'll use that language all the time. I just want you to be able to understand those words. And these are all complicated things that I will maybe talk about later. And those are some sources. Okay, so it's 4 o'clock. Thank you so much. Sorry I was late getting started. We will do a little bit more Git on Thursday, and I think we'll keep it technical for this whole week, and we'll talk about Habermas on Tuesday next week.